Scary telling.
About 15 years ago, my younger sister and I were having a movie night in the living room. My parents were asleep, and our older sister was out with friends. It was just the two of us, snuggled up on the couch, watching our favorite movie. But as the night wore on, things started to get weird. I noticed a strange presence in the room, like someone was watching us. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. It was like a dark shadow, flitting around the edges of the room. I tried to ignore it and focus on the movie, but my sister started to get scared. She kept asking me if I saw anything, and I tried to reassure her that it was nothing. But deep down, I knew something was off. As the movie ended and we prepared to go to bed, I felt a chill run down my spine. The presence in the room was getting stronger, more oppressive. I didn't want to leave my sister alone, but I knew I had to go to my own room. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was looming over me, watching me. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The next night, we decided to have another movie night. This time, we made sure to lock all the doors and windows, hoping to keep out any unwanted visitors. But as soon as we started the movie, I saw the shadowy figure again. It was darker this time, more defined. And it was getting closer. My sister started to cry, and I knew we had to leave. We grabbed some blankets and pillows and headed to my parents' room. But as we were walking down the hall, I felt something grab my ankle. I turned around and saw the dark figure reaching out to me. I tried to pull away, but it was like I was stuck in quicksand. I screamed for my sister to help me, but she couldn't see what was happening. Finally, I managed to break free and run to my parents' room. We huddled together, scared and confused. My dad went to investigate, but he didn't find anything. Over the next few weeks, the dark figure appeared more and more frequently. It would be there when we woke up, when we went to bed, when we were just sitting in the living room. We tried to ignore it, but it was like it was feeding off our fear. One night, my sister woke me up, screaming. She said she had seen the dark figure in her room, standing at the foot of her bed. I knew we had to do something. We contacted a paranormal investigator who came to our house with all sorts of equipment. He did his tests and interviews, and then he sat us down to tell us what he had found. He said that the house was built on an ancient burial ground, and that the spirits of the dead were angry. They didn't like the fact that we were living on their land, and they were trying to scare us away. He said the dark figure we had seen was the most powerful spirit of all, and that it was trying to possess us. He warned us to be careful, to never let our guard down. That was when we knew we had to move. We couldn't stay in that house any longer. It was like we were under attack, constantly on edge, waiting for the next scare. As we packed up our things and said goodbye to our old home, I felt a sense of relief. But I also knew that the dark figure would always be with us, following us wherever we went. It was like a curse we could never shake. Years went by, and we tried to forget about the dark figure in our haunted past. But every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of it out of the corner of my eye. It was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. Then one day, I received a phone call from my sister. She was in a panic, telling me that the dark figure had returned. It was haunting her new home, and she didn't know what to do. I knew we had to act fast. I contacted the paranormal investigator we had worked with years ago, and he agreed to help us again. He came to my sister's house and did his tests and interviews. But this time, he had a different theory. He said that the dark figure wasn't a spirit at all. It was something much more sinister. He told us that there was a portal to another dimension in my sister's house, and that the dark figure was a being from that other world. It was using the portal to come into our world to terrorize us. He said that the only way to get rid of it was to close the portal. But doing so would be dangerous, and there was no guarantee it would work. We had no choice. We had to try. We all gathered around the portal, armed with crosses and holy water. The paranormal investigator began reciting an incantation, and we braced ourselves for whatever was to come. As he spoke, the room grew cold. The air became thick with a dark, oppressive energy. And then, suddenly, the portal closed. We all let out a sigh of relief, but we knew it wasn't over. The dark figure might be gone for now, but who knew when it would return? And what other horrors awaited us in the other dimension? As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder, paranoid that the dark figure was following me. And for the first time in years, I felt truly scared. I had never been to a funeral before, but my friend's grandmother had passed away, and I wanted to show my support. As I entered the church, I felt a sense of unease wash over me, but I chalked it up to the solemn occasion. The service began, and the priest began to speak about the life of the deceased. However, as I looked up at the front of the church, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing next to her own casket was the woman we were there to mourn. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I must be hallucinating or imagining things, but when I opened them again, she was still there. Her ghostly figure looked just like the woman in the casket, but her eyes were open and alive, and she was staring straight ahead. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that was taking hold of me, but as the service continued, I couldn't take my eyes off the ghostly apparition. She never moved, never spoke, just stood there, a silent reminder of the fragility of life. After the service, I approached my friend's family and asked if they had seen the ghostly figure standing next to the casket. They looked at me with confusion and concern, and I knew then that I was the only one who had seen her. For weeks after the funeral, I couldn't shake the image of the ghostly woman out of my mind. I started having nightmares about her, where she would chase me through dark and empty halls, her eyes fixed on me like a predator stalking its prey. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, feeling like someone was watching me. As I looked around my darkened room, I saw her standing in the corner, her ghostly form illuminated by the faint light coming in through the window. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. She started moving towards me, her arms outstretched as if to grab me. I closed my eyes and prayed for it to be over, but when I opened them again, she was gone. From that day on, I became obsessed with finding out who the ghostly woman was and why she had appeared to me. I spent hours researching online, poring over old newspaper articles and obituaries, but I couldn't find anything that could explain what had happened. It wasn't until months later, while I was visiting the cemetery where my own grandmother was buried, that I finally found the answer. As I was walking through the rows of graves, I came across a tombstone that had the same name as the ghostly woman I had seen at the funeral. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the inscription on the tombstone. It was her, the woman whose ghostly figure had haunted me for months. I realized then that she must have been a restless spirit, unable to find peace in death, and that I had been chosen to see her for a reason. I left the cemetery feeling shaken and terrified, but also with a newfound respect for the power of the supernatural. I knew then that I would never be the same again, that the memory of the ghostly funeral would stay with me for the rest of my life. I was living alone in a small apartment in the city. It was an old building with creaky floors and peeling paint. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. It was my mom, calling to let me know that we had to leave early in the morning to attend a family event. I told her I would be ready and hung up. As I walked out of my bedroom, I caught a glimpse of my mom out of the corner of my eye, walking into her room. I thought it was strange, as I had just been on the phone with her. But I shrugged it off and went about my business, getting ready for bed. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They sounded like they were coming from my mom's room. I went to investigate, but when I opened the door, there was no one there. The room was empty and dark. I called out to my mom, but there was no answer. I started to feel uneasy, like something wasn't right. I tried to shake it off and went back to my room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. As I lay in bed, I heard footsteps again, this time coming from my own room. I sat up and saw my mom standing at the foot of my bed. But something was off. Her eyes were vacant, and her skin was pale and lifeless. I was frozen with fear as she started to walk towards me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as this imposter, this thing that looked like my mom but wasn't, got closer and closer. Suddenly, she lunged at me, and I could feel her cold, clammy hands around my neck. I struggled to break free, but it was no use. I was trapped, suffocating under her grip. Just when I thought it was all over, the imposter disappeared, leaving me gasping for air on my bed. I was shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there. I quickly gathered my things and fled the apartment. As I walked down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I kept turning around, but there was no one there. When I finally arrived at my family's house, I was pale and shaking. They were all concerned, asking me what had happened. But I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. I didn't want them to think I was crazy. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing the imposter everywhere I went. She would appear out of nowhere, her vacant eyes staring straight through me. I knew I had to find a way to get rid of her before she drove me insane. I did some research and found out that the imposter was a type of ghost known as a doppelganger. They were said to be evil spirits that took on the form of their victims, trying to steal their souls. I tried every trick I could think of to get rid of her. I burned sage, recited prayers, and even tried to confront her. But nothing worked. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a voice whisper in my ear. It was the imposter, and she said, "I'm never going to leave you. You belong to me now." That was the last straw. I knew I had to take drastic measures. I contacted a psychic who specialized in removing evil spirits, and she came to my apartment the next day. She performed a ritual that involved burning herbs and reciting ancient chants. At first, I didn't think it was working, but then I felt a sudden shift in the energy of the room. The air felt lighter, and the imposter's presence was gone. I was relieved, but also exhausted. The psychic warned me that the doppelganger might return, so I had to be vigilant. But for the first time in weeks, I was able to sleep soundly through the night. Months went by, and I thought I had finally put the imposter behind me. But one day, as I was walking down the street, I saw her again. She was standing on the other side of the road, watching me with those vacant eyes. I froze, not knowing what to do. But then, something inside me snapped. I refused to let her control me anymore. I walked towards her, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, the imposter started to fade away, like a mirage in the desert. And then she was gone, disappearing into thin air. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, knowing that I had finally conquered my fear. I realized that the imposter had no power over me anymore. I was free. But the memory of that night still haunts me to this day. I never told my family what happened, but I know they could see the fear in my eyes. And every time I see my mom, I can't help but wonder, what if it's not really her? I never believed in ghosts until I inherited my mother's wedding ring. It all started when my mother lost her wedding ring. It was a beautiful gold band with a diamond in the center. She had taken it off while doing dishes and had set it on the kitchen counter, but when she went to put it back on, it was gone. My parents tore the house apart looking for it, but it was nowhere to be found. Years went by, and my mother had resigned herself to the fact that the ring was lost forever. But then, on the day of her funeral, I found the ring sitting on the dresser in her bedroom. It was as if she had left it there for me to find. At first, I was happy to have something to remember my mother by, but then strange things started happening. Every night, I would hear a faint tapping sound coming from the direction of the ring. I tried to ignore it, but it was always there, like a constant reminder of its presence. One night, I woke up to find the ring floating in the air above my bed. I screamed and tried to run out of the room, but something held me back. It was like an invisible force was keeping me in place. The ring then began to spin faster and faster, and I heard my mother's voice whispering my name. I couldn't move or speak, and the ring seemed to be getting closer and closer. Just when I thought it was going to engulf me, it stopped spinning and fell to the ground with a loud clatter. I managed to break free of whatever was holding me back and ran out of the room. I stayed with a friend for a few nights, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I eventually decided to confront whatever was haunting me. I went back to my mother's house and stood in front of her bedroom door, my heart pounding in my chest. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open, and there it was, the ring, sitting on the dresser just like before. I picked it up and held it in my hand, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. I put the ring back on the dresser and turned to leave, but then I heard a voice behind me. It was my mother's voice, but it was different somehow. It was colder and more distant than I remembered. She told me that she had made a deal with something, and that something was coming for me. She said that the ring was cursed, and that I was now cursed too. I ran out of the house and never went back. But even now, years later, I can feel the ring's presence with me. It's like it's watching me, waiting for me to slip up so it can take its revenge. I don't know what my mother got herself into, but I do know one thing. I should have never taken that cursed ring. I had a dream where I was engaged to a man named Bull. When I woke up, I thought it was weird, but I went about my day. It was just a dream, after all. But then I started having the same dream over and over again. In my dream, Bull was charming and loving, but there was something about him that made me uneasy. It was like he was too perfect, too good to be true. But still, I couldn't resist his charms. One day, as I was walking to work, I saw a man who looked just like Bull. I thought it was a coincidence, but then I saw him again the next day, and the day after that. He was always there, watching me. I tried to ignore him, but he was always in the back of my mind. And then, one day, he approached me. He introduced himself as Bull and said that he was the man from my dreams. I was shocked, but also intrigued. He asked me out on a date, and I said yes. I don't know why I did it. It was like I was under his spell. We went to a fancy restaurant, and he was the perfect gentleman. But there was something off about him, something that made me feel uncomfortable. As the night went on, I started to feel dizzy and disoriented. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to get up to leave, but I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed. That's when I saw it. Bull's eyes had turned black, and his face was twisted into a grotesque grin. He leaned in close and whispered in my ear, "You're mine now." I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat. It was just a dream, I told myself. But then I noticed something on my nightstand. It was a ring, a beautiful diamond ring that I had never seen before. The next day, I went to work, trying to convince myself that it was all just my imagination. But then I saw Bull again. He was waiting for me outside my office building. He had a bouquet of flowers and a creepy smile on his face. I tried to run away, but he caught up to me. He grabbed my arm and pulled me close. "You belong to me," he whispered. "You always have." That was when I realized that my dream wasn't just a dream. It was a premonition, a warning. And now, I was trapped in a nightmare. I tried to escape from Bull's grasp, but it was like he had supernatural strength. He dragged me to a dark alleyway and forced me to put on the diamond ring. It was like it was fused to my finger, like I was now bound to him forever. That's when I saw his true form. He wasn't human at all. He was a demon, a creature from the depths of hell. And he had chosen me as his bride. For days, I was trapped in that alleyway, unable to leave. Bull would come and go, bringing me food and water, but also tormenting me with his demonic powers. I knew I had to find a way out, but I was running out of time. Finally, I managed to break free. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back. I didn't stop until I was miles away from that alleyway, from Bull, from everything. But I knew he would find me again. He was relentless, and he would stop at nothing to make me his bride. I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from.